Pour yourself a fresh cup of awakening with Coffee with Wally, the podcast that brews enlightening discussions with a grind of the past and future. Join host and seasoned broadcast journalist Wally Wood of the Wood News Group and co-host Andy Valudes, the marine marketer and master strategist from Marketing Dynamics, as they explore the past, present, and future. Dive into a world where technology and globalization intersect with prophecy. Each week, Coffee with Wally links ancient and recent history to tomorrow, making sense of today's rapid changes through the lens of Revelation 13. Don't miss any episode. Visit coffeewithwally.com and subscribe for your weekly espresso of insight. Coffee with Wally, a fresh cup of awakening, awaits you. Coffee with Wally, where understanding our times becomes clear over caffeine.
All right, we're back. My name is Andy Valudes. I'm your co-host of Coffee with Wally, here with your host, Wally Wood. Hey, Wally, how you doing today?
Good afternoon, good morning to you too, sir. Hello.
We always have the same greeting, and it's always a good day, right? We record on Fridays now, then we air this show, and we thank our listeners who've been watching. We've got this Coffee with Wally WebXtra where we focus on hard believers, and we talk about a variety of different subjects. So, Wally, what do you have for us today?
Well, today I would consider this to be my public service day. The person we're going to be interviewing is not being interviewed because of any deep faith or anything of this nature. It has a lot to do with the fact that he and I have known each other for over 20 years now. Where you and I hooked up, Andy, was with the National Space and Technology Association. And my guest today was also a part of that operation that we had back then from 2003 to 2013. And I'm going to be introducing him, but he is a professor, a futurist. Now, those of you who are veterans of this show, you know that I deal in Bible prophecy and the future and things like this. But he's taking it to a different degree, more of an academic approach to studying the future. His name is Dr. Peter Bishop, and he's a professional futurist, and some would consider futurologist, a retired associate professor of strategic foresight, and the former director of the graduate program of future studies at the University of Houston. He specializes in techniques for long-term forecasting and planning. We're going to be talking about that in greater length here in just a minute. I want to find out, how do you study the future when it's not even here yet? But among his clients, and by the way, he's another one of our Wikipedia specialists, stars. I'm finding a lot of the people I know are on Wikipedia now. But among his clients, he's got IBM, NASA, Johnson Space Center here in Houston, the Defense and Central Intelligence Agencies, the Texas Department of Transportation, California Environmental Protection Agency, W.K. Kellogg Foundation. He's the author of a book entitled Thinking About the Future, Guidelines for Strategic Foresight. And in the book, he says, we teach the future is a global nonprofit movement that promotes futures literacy as a life skill for student educators. Our mission is to teach futures thinking skills to students and educators around the world and to inspire them to influence their futures. The Teach the Future curriculum in various different formats is taught in schools or after school hours around the world. So he's the founder of Teach the Future. Peter Bishop, welcome to Coffee with Wally, my friend.
It's always good seeing you, Wally. Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time, my friend. And I want to start out by, first of all, getting a little bit about your background first. You are a professor, and you come from a very rich background, but how did you gain this interest way back when in teaching about the future?
Well, I was born as a young child, and I grew up after that. So let me be clear.
Welcome to the club.
I remember watching the news in the 1950s, Wally. I don't know if you remember way back then, but there were news programs. One of my wife's best friend's husband was a POW in the Korean War, early 50s. And we watched him on our brand new television in about 1953 get off of a helicopter.
Yes.
Turning to the United States after being a POW. I thought, that's interesting, and I was, very young at that time. Comes along the Hungarian Revolution against the Soviet Union, comes along Sputnik, comes along, lots of things. And I said, what is going on? And then the raucous 60s and 70s, I mean, you
Yeah.
remember those, of course, sex, drugs, and rock and roll created lots of change. And
Yeah.
I moved out of physics into sociology, wanting to study social change and understand social change.
Now,
That's
what
the
school
good
were you
news.
going to at the time?
Excuse me?
What school were you going to at the time?
Well, I was recruited to teach statistics and research methods at the University of Houston in Clear Lake, 1976. So I was
Okay.
I was in Houston. Well,
Okay.
at that before that, I was at Michigan State University and went there to study social change. The bad news is that sociologists, unfortunately, don't really spend much time on social change because it takes too long.
Yeah.
They don't get their publications. They got to get their dissertations done. They don't get tenure, et cetera, et cetera. So I continued. I got my degree in sociology, made up more or less a curriculum for myself about social change, and landed at Clear Lake, where they had already established this degree called Studies of the Future, 1975.
Okay.
Taught my stat courses and research courses for a while, and then moved over and went to the faculty and said, I'm really interested in social change, and I've taught sociology for some time. Can I join your faculty? And they said, sure, if you run the program. In
Wow.
the university, it's kind of an upside down hierarchy. The young kid, the new guy, has to, talk to the dean and do the budget and the schedule. And that was
Right.
my beginning, 1983, as a futurist.
Okay. So you started the course in 1983, if I'm hearing you
No,
correctly.
no, it was already established. The degree was established by a dean there, the dean of human sciences and humanities at the Clear Lake campus, a man named Calvin Cannon. This was the 1970s. The
Oh,
future was everywhere. I mean, people
yeah.
were reading The Future Shock, were reading Population Bomb, they were reading Limits to Growth and all kinds. So the future was on everyone's mind in the 60s and 70s. So Cal said, hey, we teach about the past, don't we? I said, yes, sir. Why don't we teach about the future?
Yeah.
Didn't have a good answer to that at the time, and so I joined the faculty and eventually became a futurist as a result.
You should have told him to call Alvin Toffler to answer that question.
Well, I know, yeah. No, I met Toffler over time. Sure. No, he's a very
Yeah.
famous person, had wonderful, prescient things to say about, indeed, our present.
Yes. And John Nesbitt,
Right.
Megatrends.
1980s, yeah.
I've
Megatrends.
got all of them in my library too, brother. And but this is intriguing that you would actually teach a course
Right.
on the future. And in your book, Teaching About the Future. Now, just to alarm everybody, first, it's available on Amazon, but it's got textbook pricing.
Unfortunately, yeah, there's a
Yeah.
real racket of pricing textbooks because students are not the buyers. The
Right.
professor does the selection and the students have to go along with it. It's a shame. We shouldn't have done that. I
Yeah.
regret that we did that.
You know, I've gotten so used to Amazon. Once they price a book high enough, it usually suggests that the book is not available, but they won't tell you that. They'll just price it so that you can't buy it. In your particular case, this is an actual curriculum course book,
Right.
and so they gave it that pricing as such.
Yeah.
But teaching about the future, that intrigues me and has ever since I've known you. And I want you to explain to us how you do that. Because you said in the book, we've got history, we've got journalists who review the present, but what about the future? How do you, and explain to us, if you would, what constitutes a futurologist to the point of being hired by companies on staff as a futurologist? But explain to us first the nature of this course, this concept, and then you can take us into the other.
Well, and I always like to begin in the past, Wally, to give us some context of where we've come in terms of the 21st century and teaching about the future.
Okay.
There was no future as we think of it some 300 years ago. Society before that time, in most people's minds, was generally static. We're talking about the Renaissance, talking about the Middle Ages. I would say talking about most countries in the world at that time, even China at that time, very static. So they expected that their life would be like their parents' life, like their grandparents had been, and that their children and their grandchildren's life, I mean, if they were a peasant, they would stay a peasant. If they were
Okay.
born a noble, they would stay a noble. So they didn't have the concept of even social change, much less the future. The future in those days, as you well know, in religion, was what we have come to call eschatology. the end of
Yes.
times. And indeed, the future of the individual was their eternal salvation or damnation. I've come out of a Catholic background, so we studied and learned all that stuff and believed all that stuff as well. So that was the future 300 years ago. So what happened was the Industrial Revolution. Nobody expected the Industrial Revolution, right? That's what
Right.
Monty Python said. And people realized, wait a minute, my life is different than my parents'. My children's life, therefore, might be different. Oh, there's this thing called social change. Society is actually changing. And they created this concept of the future and indeed progress, because technology was, to some extent, improving people's lives, giving them a little bit more food, giving them a little bit more mobility. And this is the 18th century. Of course,
Yes.
even in those days, futurists did not agree on the future, because we have a gentleman at that same time called Thomas Malthus. And he said,
Yes.
no, it's not going to be so much happy. We're going to have more people who are going to eat more, and we're still going to be poor. I don't care what you do
Yes.
with the technology. So this disagreement about the future is longstanding. We went way ahead in the 20th century with mathematical forecasting, business forecasting, econometrics, market research, what Andy did, what Christian Cruz did at Toshiba back in the day. And those were mathematical approaches to the future. And there was a great advance in that of the 20th century forecasting. You have to make an assumption, however, to use the past as the indicator of the future. And that is that the future has to be like the past. And it is, and it was. But now, of course, it's becoming less so. The future is not so much like the past, so we can't rely anymore on just straight line extrapolation, just spreadsheet calculations. We have to use another human faculty other than mathematical numeracy, and that is imagination. What might happen? We have to ask the question, what if? And we do that all the time. I mean, if you're going to the airport, what if? What if there's traffic? What if there's a fog? What if blah, blah? And this is a human trait. But when we're talking about the big future, the 20, 30 years future, oh no, we're not allowed to use our imagination. That's not scientific. That's
Yeah.
not real. We can't do that. And we argue, yes, you should do the extrapolation. Do it. We do it. That's our first step, if you notice in the book. That's called the expected future. This is
Yeah.
where we're headed. But do you always get to where you're headed? Of course not. And people in complex and dangerous occupations are asking what if all the time. Soldiers in the battlefield, Andy, right? What if you're sure what's going to happen in the future, you could be dead. Literally. I mean, it's that important. Airline
Yeah.
pilots, astronauts, police officers on the street are always looking out for, how am I going to be surprised? The good ones, the ones who stay alive, are always saying, how am I going to be surprised? Why don't we bring that into our planning, into our organizations, into our government, and into our businesses? Some are doing it more than ever before, but still very few. And where
Yeah.
it's not being done is in school. School is still obviously devoted to teaching facts. And if there is a process, it's the mathematical process of calculation and extrapolation, which is not bad and it's not wrong. It's a possible future. In fact, it's probably the most likely future. But the most likely future is not itself likely. Herman Kahn, one of the famous futurists in the 50s and 60s, said the most likely future isn't
Yes.
likely. No, it's not. If you roll a pair of dice, which I know all of you probably haven't done in a long time, given your religious beliefs, but nevertheless, if you just do that in a secular fashion, there are 11 different possibilities. The most likely is 7, that
Yeah.
combination. But it only happens 1 out of every 6 times.
You know, you're reminding me something of what we see in Scripture, that we see through a glass darkly. And you're really extrapolating on that. I'm just surprised that anyone would come along and try to make that into a science.
Okay, well, let me get to the science part. So you
Okay.
said, how can we teach about the future because it hasn't happened yet?
Yeah.
Let me give you a blinding glimpse of the obvious. The past doesn't exist anymore either.
Yes.
We study it. We're professional. We know about the past, and it's something that, as a futurist, I spend a lot of time reading about and hearing about history and change in the historical context. How do we do that? Well, we do that using evidence, very scientifically. We have documents, we have photographs, we have buildings, ruins, cornerstones, you name it. And we use those pieces. Those do not exist in the past. They exist in the present. And we use something called inference to make a conclusion that if that diary is accurate, then this is the way the world was in 1890 or 1750 or 1950 or whatever. So we study the past using evidence, but we also have to make assumptions. We have to make assumptions that somebody didn't doctor that photograph. We have to make assumptions that someone didn't create a fake document to lead us astray about the past. It didn't happen very often, and therefore those assumptions were pretty solid. And we know what the Napoleonic Wars and World War II and the invention of chemistry are all really solid facts about the past. We also do the same process in understanding and extrapolating into the future. The future doesn't exist, nor does the past. We use evidence. We don't have documents or photographs, unfortunately, but we have trends. We have people's expectations. We have their values. We have their visions and their aspirations. And those tend us to send in a particular direction. And therefore, we make the assumption, if that trend continues, here's where we'll be. If that plan is successful, here's where we will be. But in the future's case, those are not very good assumptions. Trends change a lot, and plans are unsuccessful. And what we want to see happen oftentimes does not happen. And so we have to challenge those assumptions. And out of that challenge comes our alternative futures, not just one future, not just the expected future, but multiple futures. And that's the key to thinking about the future in the 21st century. It's not just one future, it's many futures. I draw the distinction between, it's not like a road where we end up at the T at the end of the road and we have to turn left or right, or one destination. It's a river delta. A river runs through the channel, the Mississippi River, the Brazos River, whatever, runs through and it has one past and one present. But when it gets to the sea, it becomes a multiple channels. So when we think about the future, it's not one, it's many. And we challenge the assumptions and say, what if? What if this doesn't work? What if we're wrong? What if this event happens? And that's how we create. It's not a science, it is a scientific, partially scientific, but it's also an imaginative enterprise. We're using both capabilities as human beings. Logical thinking and evidence, yes, and imaginative thinking and thinking about things that have not yet existed. That's the attitude of mind that should be in the culture, and indeed it should be in the schools. And that's what Teach the Future is about, bringing those concepts to young people.
Okay, so how is this beneficial to a major corporation, and why would they hire a futurologist on the team? What does that futurologist produce for that company that's of value to the company?
Okay, you and Andy are running a podcast, right?
Yes.
Do you think about contingencies? Do you think about things that could go better than you expected? My gosh, here's a person who had a better interview than I even thought. It was perfect. It said all the right things. And do you think about things that might be a problem? You think about, timing and technology and whatever once in a while. Andy's doing a lot of technology. I'm sure he's thinking about, what if this doesn't work? And what if this is broken? And what if this should, something should happen? Do you think about those things?
Also think about when my next cup of coffee is coming from.
Well, yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. So do you think about those things?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Should astronauts think about, well, what happens if this switch is broken? Should airlines pilots be thinking about, what if the engine, the left engine goes out? They think about that all the time and they practice it. Why shouldn't companies be thinking about what if? What if our customers should go someplace else? What if our technology doesn't work? What if our marketing people don't send the right message? They should be thinking about that as well.
Okay. So this takes the load off of the CEO and the leaders in the company, and it throws it on the back of the futurologists to solve?
No, futurists are advisors, they're staff, they're not decision makers. So
Okay.
the CEO, it shifts the load. It shifts the load from, tell me what's going to happen. And the futurist will say, I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't tell you that. I can tell you what could happen, what we expect to happen, and what might happen instead. And here are the reasons. Here are the assumptions that, what if that trend were not to continue? What if that? And in the 21st century, that's why we're doing this now. We have so many expected futures that do not occur. that something else happens instead, that not just even every CEO, every person who makes decisions, every parent, every student, every teacher, every worker should always be thinking about what if.
Well, in the 8 minutes that we have left, let's focus on teachthefuture.org and what it is that you are currently doing with students around the world.
Well, basically, we have a curriculum called FutureWise, and we have offered that curriculum to the first school in the United States. I wish 10 years ago this would have happened then, but it's happening now. It's a school in near Minneapolis, St. Paul, that has adopted this as a class on futures literacy for the fall semester. So we also have a school near Toronto who is creating a future club. We're really educating students, not so much in a formal classroom, but in other places, in an after school activity. And we're working with both of those schools. We have students learning about the future and using our Futures Thinking playbook in Istanbul, Turkey. Every 5th and 9th grader in this private school gets a futures course about those things. We have schools in Barcelona, Spain, in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I wish the list went on and on. Unfortunately, it doesn't. We're still in the early days.
And are the kids rushing to this? Are they adopting it?
I have to tell you the story. Istanbul was the first school that really adopted this in a serious way. And I did the training of the teachers. And after the first semester, the school gave out a survey and asked the students what they thought of the course. They loved it. They got to talk about important things. They got to express themselves. It's very open. There is a process. You can't just do anything you want. But at the same time, they choose a topic that they're interested in, and they learn skills to investigate it, to do research in it. They asked the teachers, what did you think of the course? No, I didn't like it. And I was amazed at the result. I said, here you have engaged students who are actually acting and learning on their own. And he said, well, they asked me the question, what was going to happen in the future? And I didn't have a good answer.
Yeah.
Because the teachers always believe traditional teaching is giving answers, not teaching people how to figure things out for themselves. So once we corrected that, they said, no, this is great. I don't have to answer that. I said, frankly, the answer is, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Let's figure it out together.
Yeah, let's work on it. Yeah.
And they love that. And that was 3 or 4 years ago, and they're doing very, very well.
The difference between adults and kids.
Well, but kids should be, and this is my mega aspiration for education, get out of the textbooks. Yeah. Get into the skills. Students are learning skills, but they're learning them outside the classroom. They're learning them on the sports field. They're learning them when they take band or theater. They're learning them when they get into student council and talk to the administration about the school and things like that. In history, they're not learning them. In math, they're learning calculation, but they're not learning mathematical thinking. They're not learning them in science. They're learning facts. If we were to shift the education away from these facts, which now everybody can look up on ChatGPT or Google, and why am I having to learn all these facts? It's just, to me, really, really obvious that we should be. Now, it's hard to shift education. It's a conserving institution. It believes that its purpose is to transmit the values of the past and the facts of the past into the future. And we should. There's no doubt about that. But only that. The future is going to be different than the past. We need to equip students to be prepared for that difference.
I find it fascinating that a man with white hair and white beard is being flexible enough to say be non-traditional.
Well, if life is short, Wally, as you well know, and you've been doing wonderful things with your life, I hope I can look back and say I'm doing something important with mine.
Well, you got the student backup, that's for sure. For those in the audience who are still a little bit fuzzy as to what constitutes a futurist, let me give you some names that may ring a bell to you, and to include our infamous Peter Bishop in those names. You have such names as Aldous Huxley, who is the author of Brave New World, Alvin Toffler, author of Future Shock, Buckminster Fuller, Carl Sagan, Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame, George Orwell, 1984, H.G. Wells, Isaac Asimov, The Three Laws of Robotics, Jeremy Rifkin, in his piece on entropy, the third law of thermodynamics, John Nesbitt, Megatrends, Kevin Kelly, founding executive editor of Wired magazine; Ray Kurzweil, author of The Singularity; Stephen Hawking; Walt Disney; and Robert Jastrow, a NASA scientist. This is the field in which Peter Bishop is numbered among the futurists. And as we depart here, I'm kind of reminded of what I picked up from Robert Jastrow way back in the day in 1980, when he wrote in the Reader's Digest an article entitled "Have Astronomers Found God?" And in his closing paragraph, Pete, you might appreciate this, he concluded by saying, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries."
Well, that's wonderful, Wally. And let me ask you, or challenge the audience to think about, why are we keeping all the wonderful work that you just listed? People who have been working on the future for decades. Why
Yes.
are we keeping that a secret from kids?
Yes.
Why are we not sharing this? I've done adult training a lot, and the question often comes up, often, why didn't I learn this in school?
Yes.
And I don't have a real good reason for that. There are some misconceptions about the future, like you can't study something that doesn't exist. Well, then you can't study the past either.
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah.
We do it
Well,
we do it rigorously, academically, but we also use a skill called imagination and
yes.
aspiration. Let that come into the school. It's not all logic, it's not all math, it's not all scientific thinking. We should have students who are yearning to become adults so that they can change the world. That is what we
Amen.
should be doing,
Amen.
and that's not happening in most schools today.
My answer to that question is it's all in the libraries. But who goes to the
It
library?
is. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe most schools, I don't think, have most of those books.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. We are in a changing trend. It's all, pardon me, using the word I came up with in 1998, it's all diginomic, brother. And you're right there at the cutting edge of that threshold into that new world thinking. And I just congratulate you for having stuck with this all these years. And I knew you back when you had dark hair.
You
And
did
knew
too,
me,
Wally. Let's be fair now. Come
and
on.
you knew me back when I had
That's
hair.
back when Andy had hair.
Yeah.
I had rock and roll hair, by the way.
Exactly.
Peter Bishop, we appreciate you, and thank you so much for agreeing to be with us in this interview. And who knows, we'll probably talk about this in the future. Who knows?
I certainly hope so, Wally. Thank you very much for having me, and teach the future. Talk to your kids, talk to your teachers, get this in the schools. That's my mission today, and I'll keep working at it.
Amen. Andy?
You've been watching with Wally, where understanding our times becomes clear over caffeine.